On this episode, my guest is Nick Turchyn. Nick is the X&O's analyst and scouting content creator for CoverOne.net. He is also co-host of the Big Blue Banter podcast. Nick puts most of his content out now on Twitter as his handle Tmanic21, focusing mostly on positional and schematic breakdowns of the Giants, but also other teams at the NFL and college level. We will be discussing Nick's evaluation of some of the Giants' 2019 draft picks and undrafted free agent signings. As we move along, he will explain some of the football jargon as it pertains to the content. Joining me will be Brian McGinn of the BigHitter's Corner and fellow administrator of the Big Blue Huddle. I'm Ed Bueti, and this is the Big Blue Huddle podcast. Hi, Nick. Thank you for coming on today. And we have Brian on also, so say hi to the people on the podcast.
How's it going, guys?
Brian, you there?
I sure am. Hey, Nick, how are we doing today?
Real good, real good. Glad to be here, guys.
Thanks for coming on, Nick. So this podcast, we want to focus on not just the hardcore fans, which we have a lot of, obviously, but also for some of the fans that want to learn more about the game and the players that are looking to make the team. You do a lot of in-depth analysis, and there's some words and vocabulary, jargon, so to speak, that you use that some people may not be familiar with. Let me just touch on real quick. This period before the season, it's about starting with free agency, and the Giants then sign players that are available that are no longer on other teams. And then we have voluntary mini camps. Then the NFL draft takes place where college players are selected by NFL teams based on a certain order. Then after the draft is over, they sign undrafted free agents. Then there's a mini camp for rookies, and then there's a mini camp for all the vets and players, as well as the rookies, to play together and to learn more about the offense and the defense. And then we have training camp in late July and August. At that point, then they go into preseason games, and then there's the cutdowns to the final 53. Nick, you want to add anything to that as far as what goes on this time of year and what you look for in some of these players?
No, I think that's a good overview, and I think in general, getting the rookies in camp and then seeing the development of the second-year players, that's kind of what I would be keying on. But absolutely, from a timeline perspective, that's a real good outline.
Okay, let's take a look at, first of all, the draft players. But before we get into that, Nick, could you just outline for those folks who may not be as familiar, some of the words that you might be using, and what are the responsibilities? Let's start with defense. What are the responsibilities of a defensive tackle, the one technique, the three technique, and what does technique mean? And then go into the linebackers in the 3-4. What are their responsibilities as outside linebackers, inside linebackers, the safeties, and then the corners and the slot corner? Can you just overview that quickly for us?
Yeah, sure. So within a 3-4 base scheme, which is what James Bettcher runs, which is run about 30 to 35% of the time of snaps, which is a low number because we can get into why that is, but let's just start with base defense alone, has 3 down linemen and 4 linebackers. It is a one-gap scheme, meaning that basically the defenders, call it 90% of the time, 95% of the time, are responsible for one gap. A single gap as they play, so they can play kind of straight ahead and maybe fire off, or basically it just simplifies their reads and their keys.
What do you call a gap, if I could interrupt you?
So a gap would be in between the gaps that are in between the offensive linemen, whether they're down or off. So if you have a tight end that's just off the line of scrimmage, that would be considered a gap too as well. So it's a 1-to-1 ratio. So if you have six down offensive linemen, 5 offensive linemen, and then a tight end, that's 6 lines, that's 6 linemen, that's creating 7 gaps to account for.
Okay.
So, and that's a great question because people kind of wonder, hey, when defenses stack the box, what does that mean? Well, just think about it. If an offense stacks the box, with 7 guys on the line, that creates 8 gaps. If the defense is a one-gap scheme, they've got to account for all 8 gaps somehow. So they're going to sink guys closer to there, to that area within the box because they simply have to defend the run.
And that's where the responsibilities come into place as to what their job is to execute.
Correct. And so starting off, if we go from the outside in, the outside linebacker in this 3-4 base is going to be playing in a technique, probably a 6 technique or wider. What we mean by that is 6 technique is heads up on the tight end. And so basically over the tight end to the strong side, or kind of just outside the tackle to on the open side or the weak side of the field, which is the other side, because there's going to be 2 off.
What's a technique?
So a technique would be basically an alignment position based upon where the offensive line is. So it's basically a numbering system that guys can look at online. But to describe it, basically a 0 technique. I like to work on it outside to in. It kind of makes it easier for guys. A 0 technique is directly over the center. A 1 technique is just outside, is on a shoulder basically of the center. A 2 technique is directly over the guard. A 3 technique is on the guard's outside shoulder. A 4 technique is is basically heads up on the tackle. And then just to give it guys, like, not to make it super complex, but a 4I is on his inside shoulder. And so it basically goes from there on out. And basically for each responsibility and for each position along the defensive line, generally profiles of traits are found at each one. So with the outside linebackers, who are at this, like we said, the 6 technique and kind of out, I would say, they are basically 2-way players that can drop back into coverage but can also rush the passer. They're generally seen between, call it like, and now in the NFL, between 240 and 280 pounds. They play well with their hands. They're pretty athletic. And like I said, they're dual threats that can both defend the run and the pass kind of simultaneously. But you get guys like Kareem Martin, who are a little bigger, who are, maybe don't defend the pass as much in man coverage, but can do it in zone. They've got enough athleticism in zone. Going down the line, the 3-4 base, the next player I look at would be a 5 technique. And usually the 5 technique, the way the Giants played, they were playing him to the strong side. So he'd be inside the tight end and just outside the tackle's shoulder. He generally is a player there that on the strong side, I would say, kind of has basically a 1-gap responsibility, but is pretty versatile along the line. BJ Hill played this position pretty well for the Giants. I would say it's kind of somewhere for the Giants between 290 and 310 pounds is kind of the sweet spot, and it can be lighter. It's basically a guy who could, it mirrors a 3 technique in some cases, and basically kind of has good versatility along the line. Going along the line further would be a 3 technique, and a 3 technique is just going to be a little stouter. It's going to be, like we said, just outside the guard, between the guard and the tackle. Generally in the NFL, the trend now is for guys that play with speed and get up the field and are massive disruptors. We're talking about guys like Aaron Donald and the like. And his responsibility is a little bit more geared, is run to pass, just like the rest of the defensive line. But I would say his ability to hold gaps, maintain the interior gaps, and more importantly, maintain ground on double teams is absolutely crucial, and much more crucial than, say, a 5 technique in that perspective. And a big reason why they want to hold those double teams is if they don't hold a double team, the lineman climbs to the next level, to the inside linebacker, which the easier that's done, the more successful the run play is going to be. And then you look down, the 0 or the 1 technique is generally the most stout player on the team from a traditional sense. For the way Betcher views it, it's not exactly that way, just because he views the entire line as kind of interchangeable, and the entire defense plays 2 lines in general. But getting back to the 1 technique, you're seeing a guy who is playing basically right on top of right on top of the center, is almost guaranteed double teams in pass rush and in defending the run. And I would say has to have really good strength to be able to play through contact, more so than the 3 technique, because of that guaranteed double team, and understanding that usually next to him in most over formations is going to be an open gap that that the linebacker is going to have to account for. So that means that he's going to have to kind of be ready to, in my opinion, help the linebacker the most. And that kind of sums up the line. And again, it's a 1-gap scheme. Where each player is responsible for that gap, and then I think that the key thing for James Betcher to differentiate from other guys is that he likes to move B.J. Hill into the 1 technique and move the 1 technique out to the 5 technique in terms of the players that usually play that way. And it keeps the offense off balance, and it keeps the offense kind of not guessing, but never, always facing fresh legs that are ready to get up the field and get on them physically. Although maybe they'll give up some plays that way because they are being aggressive. But that's kind of his goal, is aggression through the front 7.
Okay, so you touched on the outside linebackers as being on the line of scrimmage as part of that defensive line front. What are the responsibilities of the inside linebackers?
Yeah, so the inside linebackers are stacked behind the front, or behind the defensive line, generally playing between what we would call a 10 technique out to a 40 technique, and while that mirrors is the same, call it 1 or 3 or 4 technique, but add a 0, and that's how they refer to linebackers. And so that's the gap that they're or the position that they find themselves on along the line. They're responsible for a gap as well and run. Usually there is a strong side and a weak side player, linebacker, that is responsible for different things. Or most of the time different things, but to simplify it, it's run key first to then play pass, or blitz. I would kind of say that the bigger key for what Betcher focuses on is undersized guys traditionally that are very, very versatile, that can basically most of them are ex-safeties at some level. They find themselves between 220 pounds and 235 pounds, which is way lower than the traditional linebackers that play that position. And I would say Betcher likes speed to be able to control their gap, but will sacrifice ability to play the run in the ability to blitz and get downhill, as well as ability to cover for anywhere from a tight end or a running back in man into aggressive zone principles too. So you're talking about a player that if you look at guys like Devin Bush in the draft this year, he came in at 235 pounds. I would say he's almost kind of on the heavier end for a guy that Betcher would want. So you want that versatility is the key. And although, again, he's going to sacrifice some parts of the play strength against linemen that are going to climb to the second level when they block. But ultimately that's kind of that key. And you look, that's what, guys, where we find the money backer position on, which is just a kind of a term that was invented by Betcher and a few other guys at the college level. And that basically means the guy that can help you, when you're playing on third down, that he can basically not only just shut down the tight end, but as well kind of do different things in zone and basically be like a very aggressive zone rat hole player, we call it, underneath, and helping his guys underneath in man.
Wow, that's excellent. I mean, you just roll that right off your tongue as though it's like the flow is just incredible. I got a couple of questions, though. The inside linebacker, you would say that a Devin White and Devin Bush would be inside linebackers in the Giants' 3-4 scheme, not outside linebackers. And who would cover the tight end? Would it be the inside strong side backer, or would it be the left outside strong side outside linebacker? What would you call that player? So you have a Sam, a Will, and a Mike, but how would you put those monikers on those players? And following up on my question.
Sure. So the primary tight end matchup in Betcher's and most schemes would be the equivalent of the strong safety. That would be the primary, but we know that Betcher varies a lot of things. Like I said, so the inside linebacker would be the one to help there too as well, and that's what makes his scheme so difficult. Is he lines up 6 or 7 guys near the line of scrimmage, and you don't know who's going to blitz on third down, and you don't know who's going to cover the tight end because they all can do everything. So the way I would say it to answer your question directly is, it would, for the Giants last year, it was probably 60 to 70% the strong side safety that would be over the tight end, or the inside linebacker on that side. So the strong side inside backer. A lot of guys use will or basically a will and a jack type of term for that. It would, I guess you could call it, it's not really a Sam, because guys like to refer to the Sam as the outside guys, but it was very rarely those OLBs actually covering the tight end down the field. and especially on third down, for sure. Because in third down, they're in a different front. And we can talk about that too if you would like. But mostly it was basically, if you want to call it Landon Collins. If they were playing man, it was either Landon Collins, Michael Thomas, or basically Ogletree and or Tay Davis at the end of the year.
Okay. That was great. Brian, do you have any questions or any comments so far on what's been discussed?
Just a couple points here. What Nick is describing, and it can confuse people, is he's talking about gaps with different techniques. They use an opposite terminology on the defensive side, the A, B, C, and D gaps. I can't remember exactly why, but there is a reason as to why they use letters as opposed to reciprocal numbers and that sort of thing. So that's where your different gaps come from. But Nick, the Giants do prefer on the corners, and stop me if I'm not wrong. Betcher likes to have press corners, correct? Play a lot of man-to-man. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's a great point. So he likes guys that are versatile and can play a lot of soft press, but it's not always man-to-man on the outside. The Giants last year played about a third zone, a third match, which is kind of another something that's found much more so in college, but a fair amount at the NFL level, and a third man. The trick is, to your point, the outside corners, whether it's man or call it 70% of match principles, that guy is going to be in basic man as it is. And he's going to be in press man because he's going to shut down that number one wide receiver on the outside. That's kind of that, and that's what Betcher wants. And that's why I think they kept Eli Apple for as long as they did last year, because he actually plays pretty well in soft press into trail technique, where he is then following the wide receiver down the field and mirroring and matching his movements. That's what Apple struggles in a lot of ways, but that's what he's by far best at. And so that's the goal of the corners there, and that's what made DeAndre Baker's pick so great, is because he's very good at doing just that. He's the best player, in my opinion, in the draft at doing that at the quarterback position. So that's the goal. So whether it's basically man, but the rest of the defensive backfield is oftentimes doing something different.
Got it. Thank you.
So let's now just touch on the strong safety versus the free safety, and how does Betcher utilize his safeties? Are they interchangeable? Do you see him doing with a high safety who's really back there just for coverage purposes, and a strong safety in a run? How do you see that?
So the Betcher's really interesting with his safety play, because the defensive backfield room last year keyed on a few key things that maybe other teams didn't value as much. And the first thing was definitely FBI, football intelligence, the ability to line guys up, the ability to understand the varying schemes that they ran. These schemes aren't overly complex, but when you run them all in a defensive package facing an offense, right, that gets very, very complex, there's a lot of checks, there's a lot of adjustments that got to be made. So you need a guy that can line people up, and that's what both Collins and Curtis Riley did very, very well. Outside of that, let's just get into positional traits. The strong side safety generally lines up to the weak side. Interestingly, the language is reversed. Oftentimes is on the weak side, or closer, or what we call boundary safety. And he basically was Landon Collins last year, and is more of a versatile type player. But overall, Betcher now, with the personnel they have, he likes interchangeable safeties and basically jackknives in the defensive backfield that can do all types of things. But sticking with the boundary safety for a second, it's a guy that can take a tight end and match. Or match and man, I should say, that can play in zone, whether it be the deep half. The Giants were about 50-50 last year in terms of playing split safeties, or two deep safeties, or single high safety.
Like a cover two is what you're talking about.
Correct, yeah, that you most find in a cover two or a quarter scheme too as well, because that's what the Giants based out of quarters mostly. But they were very versatile and did all different, and did cover three often too as well. And so that safety is the key thing about the safeties and the defensive backs in general, is that he likes guys that he can at the last second time the snap and move to the line of scrimmage and blitz. And that's what you saw. Landon Collins was the best blitzer last year at doing this. Grant Haley over time got a little bit better as the season went on. And so I think the interchangeability and versatility is the key to understanding the free safety and strong safety position, because Betcher doesn't want someone who's necessarily great at one trait in terms of you want to call it coverage or what have you back there. He wants the guys that are just good enough at doing all those things and are physical and aggressive. And that defines the newest safety addition, Bethea. He played exactly that role. He played more so in the post for Betcher in Arizona, and the post meaning the deep single high safety. But he can absolutely play the line of scrimmage, and he covers tight ends very well for a guy his age. That was a great signing. Really, really like that signing. Very psyched to see how Peppers plays because he comes from a background of being a hybrid. He's a definition hybrid coming from Michigan, playing the Viper position there, which was basically a safety / linebacker position. He's going to play more in the deep. He'll play deeper and more in space for Betcher, but his blitzing ability is going to be fun to see. He's a real pure athlete, and people think he's a little weaker in coverage, but I actually think he's if you play him consistently in coverage, I think he's going to be very, very good for them. And so again, just to kind of summarize it, I think it's versatility and smarts, and then the ability to play physically is always a big part of what Betcher wants to do. So in my opinion, he sacrifices sometimes the ability to cover or the ability to play with real strong fundamentals in the secondary. And that's why I think, guys ask me all the time, how did Curtis Riley play that position all year last year? And I said, well, listen, there's not many guys that can line guys up and who could play physically. Ultimately, it didn't work out, but they prioritized those traits over more traditional traits that you see on other teams.
So how would you define weak and strong in this situation here? Let's talk about an offensive alignment where you have, let's say it's 12 personnel. So you have one running back and you have two tight ends that are in line. Okay. How would the Giants, how would Betcher play that? How would he defend that?
That's a great question. So for 12 personnel, let's say the tight ends are on opposite sides of the field, on opposite sides of the line. So right. It's like an ace formation. So if he's in base, which he probably would be, although that wasn't the case later in the year, he would be setting the three technique on the front to wherever he deemed he would want the strength to be. That would probably be to the field or to the wide side of the field. So although
when you say wide side, you're talking about where the hash mark is, correct?
Yeah, with the hash marks are. And so to explain that for people, in college, the hash marks are much wider. So the boundary side or the short side of the field is one side and the field side is the other. The wide side is the other. And things are much more determined by the position on the hashes. It's much less so in the NFL, but it's still prevalent. And it's still prevalent for how they align things. So I would say the three technique would most oftentimes be the field in that case. And then the formation, the defensive backfield would have I would say they would set based upon the field, not based upon the strength. If it was basically a neutral offensive line that you're describing, so the boundary safety or Landon Collins' role last year, or how basically they're going to play Peppers this year, he'll play on the short side of the field, and then they would play Bethea or Curtis Riley last year on the wider side. Now, whether there was actually two distinct safeties that were even with each other in the backfield, kind of way back 12 to 14 yards off the field, or if it was the boundary safety where he was kind of like 7 yards off, and the free safety was 15 yards deeper, very clearly in a very clear or distinct, I should say, distance away from the line of scrimmage, farther away. Either or. That's generally how they played it.
Excellent. So I want to go back to Brian now. Brian, out of all of the undrafted free agents that the Giants picked, there's a couple of players there that are a little bit interesting. And I know that you've done a lot of film work and actually in person on one of those players. Could you touch on a couple of players there so we give Nick a little bit of a breather, and then we'll come back to Nick?
Well, sure. Let's talk about it. First of all, I'm from Syracuse, so obviously I know about Eric Dungy. Incredible talent. I mean, he's very, very much a great athlete. If he had gone at a combine, he would have won most of the competitions. That's how good he is as far as an athlete goes. His problem at Syracuse was injury problems. He has concussion issues, which I'm sure scared off a lot of teams as far as drafting him. Outside of that, though, he set the all-time record for passings in basically every category for Syracuse. He's very fast. He's very strong, which brings on the concussions. Has a really good arm, and he's versatile. It looks like the Giants are looking to kind of set him up for a Taysom Hill kind of position, but I don't know that right now. Gosh almighty, they just signed a guy within the last couple of weeks. But nonetheless, he would fit that sort of thing very well. He's big, he's strong, he's a very smart guy. He's a quarterback. He could fulfill a backup role as far as a quarterback goes once he develops into NFL style. So I'm actually was very excited that they signed him. The other one would be C.J. Conrad, the tight end out of Kentucky. From what I read, he probably would have been a mid-round pick, but he had a health concern which kept him out of the combine and pro days. Dropped him out of getting drafted. But yeah, look at the film of the guy. Oh my goodness, especially catching the ball over the middle. He's got really good hands. He bowls people over. He can block in line, which you look for a tight end. So I think those are two players that the Giants could make the Giants roster. I think that I give them a real good shot of making the Giants roster and thickening out the overall talent level, which is what you want. One of the things with the Giants last year is that they were thin. They didn't have a lot of talent once you dropped off of the starters. And when people got hurt, it affected the play, the defensive side especially, but also on offense. And so if you start to thicken up your overall talent level, your team becomes demonstrably good. The really good teams like New England and Seattle, they have rosters like that. And, that's what the Giants are looking to do, and hopefully it'll work out that way.
Excellent, Brian. Nick, do you have any comments about those two players? Have you looked at them at all? Maybe you caught a little bit of film on them. Do you think Eric Dungey in a Wildcat is an option, or do you think Eric Dungey could bump and become the third quarterback, eventually become the backup to Daniel Jones?
I have not got a chance to look at those players, but absolutely think that with what the Giants want to do in the red zone, whether it be Jones himself or, like you guys were mentioning, like Dungey, coming in and having and adding that mobile element from the quarterback position, running zone read, not often, but infrequently in the red zone, I think it has a high impact. So definitely think that there may be a spot for that on the Giants roster for sure. And look, Pat Shurmur likes tough guys, right? He likes guys that can play, and that's certainly what Dungey is in that sense. And C.J. Conrad is literally he's the third player down on my list that I have to see next. So I've absolutely heard about him, and especially too to tie in with Big George, their sixth round tackle. I've not seen either from Kentucky. So the Kentucky tape will be coming on soon, but and psyched to learn about it because, like you said, when medical causes these guys to drop, there's definitely opportunities in terms of talent. And 12 months, 18 months from now, you guy may be a starter, but a key role player. That's an absolute win. It's a huge win.
Now you've done some film on Zeitler, the guard, who was picked up in free agency, and also Jabril Peppers, the safety. So you want to give us an overview on those two players and what you think of them and how they fit?
Yeah, sure. Zeitler's fun. He's a 6'4", 315 pounds. He's absolutely he's a mean mauler that likes to get downfield or not likes to get downfield, but can handle any fight, fist fight in a phone booth. Really liked his use of hands. Really liked his ability to his body control and his ability to anchor within his size against anyone that he faced on the line of scrimmage. On the right side there, I think that I think he adds the element where he is scheme agnostic in the sense that he can run zone schemes or gap schemes, which is what the Giants basically did last year was a mix of both. So I think he fits that. That bill really well. And like I said, his whole thing is power and where guys will notice the difference where with a guy like Jamon Brown at right guard last year, he was very, very athletic, very light on his feet, very he was able to get around and move around pretty quickly. Zeitler is much more power based, and it's going to be a little bit nastier. It's a little bit, although he's a little smaller actually than Brown. It's a different attitude. And it's a different type of experience on that side of the line, which I think is huge. And it's, again, not a knock on Brown because I really liked him in this Giants team, and I liked him for the Giants because the guy is just upbeat as hell. But one of those things where Zeitler, I think whoever plays right tackle is going to massively benefit from a guy like that next to him. And that's what I think the Giants wanted, is that.
So you think that Saquon Barkley is going to be buying him a nice Christmas present, right? And what about Jabril Peppers?
yeah, absolutely.
and what about Jabril Peppers, the safety? He's replacing basically Landon Collins at this point, right?
He is, and the interesting thing about Peppers is at this stage in his career, he doesn't have the size profile that Collins does. So Collins often on third down would bump down to the stacks linebacker position, in that money backer position, in that really true hybrid position. I don't think Peppers is going to do that. Peppers is a little bit better in space. He's more speed based, and he just didn't find a home in Cleveland, because Cleveland had in that scheme very defined roles for players, and he is a hybrid himself, but he's a hybrid more in space. That's more like Matthew in terms of an overall safety player. He's kind of almost like the offspring of Matthew and Landon Collins, because he has elements of both. But I don't think that they're going to play him in the money back position. I think that they're going to use him as a blitzer coming from the wide side of the field the most, and then as well in coverage, not primarily against the tight end, but in the deep half of the field. And he has range as a sole one high safety in the post, which is really unique too, because most guys that can play that hybrid role do not have that trait with him. So I absolutely think he can play free safety if need be. And again, all this leads to more versatility and more creativity that Betcher can use.
What do you feel about his read and react or his recognition skills?
I think overall let's see if I have any specific notes there. I liked that. I liked his ability there. I didn't see a ton of snaps that really would have seen me not like it in Cleveland. And the biggest thing, actually, to go back to his college days, I liked him coming from Don Brown. And although they played a mostly man, they played a fair amount of match there, and he has absolutely a good ability, or comes from the Don Brown school of having the ability to key and diagnose very, very well. Whether you're a linebacker or a safety, you're going to coming from Brown's defense, you're going to absolutely have that trait, or just quite frankly, you're not going to play. So it's one of those things where his background is in that. So maybe if there was some weakness on the Cleveland side of things, I think that he has a good foundation there.
Brian, do you have any questions or comments on those two players?
Well, Jabril Peppers is replacing Landon Collins. One thing about Collins, and I have a Collins jersey, so it's not that I dislike him, but it kind of showed up over the years that he really can't, cover anybody. He's not a good cover guy. He's a tremendous, lead tackle guy. He was also very good at setting up the coverages. So he's cerebral. Peppers is a different kind of player. He's one of the best punt returners you'll ever see. He's got great hands. Yeah, I expect to see more interceptions out of him. He's a more versatile player than Landon was. So I expect big things out of him. Everybody did when he came out of college. Like Nick said, he really didn't have a home with Greg Williams in Cleveland. So I think good things out of him. As far as Ziegler goes, you can't have enough tough, nasty players, especially on the offensive line. And that is what this guy is. No ifs, ands, or buts. Like Nick said, he'll make whoever plays right tackle, whether it's you, me, or the guy sitting on the side of the road. He's going to make him a whole lot better of a right tackle. So I really, really like that sign up. For Olivier Vernon, who essentially did not thrive in the 3-4 defense at Betcher's scheme, and was basically an extra player there. So I love that trade.
So you touched on what I want to say. So with I'm gonna move on from that. So let's go on to the draft picks. We'll go from the 7th round backwards. And I know that you haven't done a lot of work on this yet, Nick. The 7th round, we have an offensive tackle and a defensive tackle that they look like they're a work in progress and may wind up on the practice squad. But there are a couple of players that you are going to do some work on in Ryan Connolly, the linebacker out of Wisconsin, and Corey Ballantyne, the cornerback out of Washburn. But do you want to touch on those, or do you want to move on to Darius Slayton, the wide receiver, and then go up the draft?
We could probably move to Slayton just because I would rather have the actually watching the tape before, or instead of just kind of going through what I'm hearing and stuff. So we could jump that way if that's okay.
That's fine. Sure.
Yeah, no, Darius Slayton he's an interesting dude. 6'1", 190 pounds.
Nick, you're breaking up a little bit. I don't know if it's the connection.
Okay. So Darius Slayton, 6'1", 190 pounds. Everyone's staring at that 4.39 40-yard time, and that's what they kind of see with a guy like this. And look, his vertical speed by the time he gets to his third or fourth stride is really, really good. Playing at Auburn in Gus Malzahn's kind of run-based scheme, I'll call it. The big thing for him is that his production and tape from 17 was a lot better than his 18 tape, and that's partially due to scheme, partially due to quarterback play, and a little bit due to him. But what's interesting is his traits really did improve his senior year. He had better releases versus press against physical corners. And we saw the ability to make guys miss, which he was really kind of a single burner guy in his junior year. I guess it was just in 2017. I'm not sure what year it was actually for him. But overall for him, my projection for him, I think he can win a roster spot as a gadget player who can win with his speed and take the top off of defense. I like him because I think over time his ceiling could certainly exceed other guys on their wide receiver core that are there currently, and so I think he is a replacement player. I think one of the bigger things for his development is going to be hanging around guys like Cody Latimer, who though Latimer's frame is certainly bigger than his. Latimer was similar coming out of college, where a little bit raw in his routes and kind of was able to win in a couple specific ways. I think that he needs to get better at the catch point, and that's where Latimer can absolutely help him, because I think his frame is a little better than people realize. It's the fact that he's 6'1" is big. In fact, he will have some reach there. He will have some vertical jump ability. So, although it's raw, it's certainly there. And I think that the hard part is for him, he needs improvement at the next level in the 0 to 8 yard range to get those releases, to get that ability to break free, because these physical corners at this next level, and they're going to be able to get him. I'm really psyched to watch kind of the DeAndre Baker battles in practice, because they actually played each other last year, and it was a great battle. Between Slayton and Baker, and actually both played pretty well. And I did a thread on that on Twitter, actually. So interested to see his development. Think that he absolutely can make the squad, and psych to see him going forward.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you both this question. This is the last offensive player as we're moving up the draft here. So wide receiver position, is it not as good as last year on paper? Is it as good, or is it better?
I can go first. I think when you lose a potential generational talent, it's hard to say it's better. I think, though, with that said, I think it's more diverse with the potential. I think alone, if Cody Latimer has a bigger role, and you have a guy who's a bona fide speed guy that can take the top off of the defense, I think in 12 to 18 months you can be better. But I think in the short run, it's hard to say it's not worse just because you're losing a potential generational talent. There's only so many guys you can get that are like that. But in terms of the overall ball distribution and distributing the ball to runners in space, which is basically what Pat Shurmur's and many offenses are like, yeah, I think that they're a little bit more diversified now, and they're going to have to, and there's a little bit room for growth there.
So on a 3 wide receiver set, which 3 wide receivers are on the field, and what positions would they be playing?
I think that you're going to have a Z wide receiver off the ball in either Shepard or Tate, and then because I think Tate and Shepard are pretty interchangeable. So they can play in the slot on that side, and you're going to have an X. The only real bona fide X wide receiver is Latimer on the other side, and that's I think that's where maybe in the long term, not this year, maybe in the next 2 to 3 years, that's what Slayton could play as well, because of both the speed element and to see where his improvement goes. But that's how I actually see I think they're clear. They're far and away the best wide receivers there, and that's kind of how. I don't know if Shurmur wanted Tate for the interchangeability or the simple ability that he can win early in routes, and that's not exactly Shepard's strong suit. I think that may have been it as well.
So do you see Shepard as the Z and Golden as the slot?
I would see them both as interchangeable, but I think either, because Tate did that or has done that in his career, and so has Shepard. I think that maybe you would say Shepard's better in the slot. So maybe Tate would be, if I had to pick one, gun to my head, I would go that way with it. But I do believe they are interchangeable.
And Brian, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, Shepard is pretty much a reception type receiver, whereas Golden Tate for the 3 years over 2016 to 2018, the most yards after catch of any receiver in the NFL. So I would assume that you're probably going to see him utilized in space where he can get the ball and be able to run with it, and you're going to use Shepard more for a possession thing. Latimer probably at this point, the field stretcher, he's strong, he's a big guy. He sure as heck can block very well. But don't count out Corey Coleman yet. He may challenge for as far as a deep threat, because that's what he was supposed to be coming out of college. So he's been disappointed career so far, but he may end up being a player who's serviceable. He may not. Who knows as far as that goes. As far as the overall strength of the wide receiver core, certainly you lose OBJ and you're losing a talent that just can't be the place, and you can't look at it that way. But bringing in Golden Tate, he's very much a quality receiver, way better blocker on running plays, and he's also a team leader type guy, which OBJ, good guy, but he had a tendency to be a bit disruptive, and so obviously Tate's not the same receiver. But I think overall the Giants, if you put it on an NFL level, their wide receiver core could be as high as in the top third. It's certainly in the top 50%, and I'm happy with that.
So do you both see as that slant receiver, that guy that used to be OBJ or Odell? As Golden Tate, you see him as that slant guy for the extra yards you have to catch?
Yeah, I think Tate, or I think that maybe he's not going to give you the same run after catch potential for sure, but his route running is excellent in Shepard. Shepard's the best route runner on the team. Mm-hmm. And so I think that makes a big deal. If you watch the tape from last year, when the Giants ran a lot of pre-snap RPOs, the results with Shepard were actually better than with OBJ, and there's a couple of reasons for that. And I think that it's something that Beckham's going to be much better at in Cleveland than he was last year. So, I think that, it's not the same in terms of Tate, and on paper, Shepard's not the same as OBJ, but I think that it's still solid in that regard. And I would say too, it's the other thing too. Shermer loves multiplicity, right? He loves the ability to interchange, and that's the way the defense plays as well. It was one of his big themes when he was hired, and I think that's what these two guys give you. Yes, they are different, but the threats can come from anywhere, and especially on that slant, because you go back to it too. That's one of Latimer's best routes. It's really his only in-breaking route that he runs well, to be fair. So, you have that dual threat, or if you run three slants on two sides of the field, you can absolutely do that too as well.
Wow. Okay. All right, so let's move on to the number 4 draft pick, and that's Julian Love, cornerback out of Notre Dame.
Yeah, Love was a fun guy to watch. Interesting that he committed to Notre Dame on the spot. I didn't realize this until I started looking at his background. He was an Indiana kid. Absolutely, that was his place he wanted to be. When the coach called him, he basically committed on the phone. I thought that was really pretty cool. He's a guy that was playing his dream in the NFL. He mostly played in multiple schemes, because Notre Dame had multiple defensive coordinators at his time there, to the boundary, so to the short side of the field as a cornerback. And initially, when I first watched him, I thought he was a little limited in his movement skills in space and off coverage. Because he was asked to backpedal a lot, and he was asked, when you backpedal, you have to transition and flip your hips, and a lot of times every human is slower at doing that than they are with running with the guy, if they're already in a running position. So it's not that I was grading him down, but I thought he was a little raw in terms of his versatility. But then I started seeing him in more games in the 2018 season, more so at the end, for the second half of the season, where his defensive coordinator moved him around a fair amount, moved him around with the slot. And he was really a good blitzer. And blitzing for a defensive back is just, It's not natural. You're playing through contact for a guy who's 200 pounds, 195 pounds against a bigger offensive lineman. It's not natural for those guys to be able to basically even have a move or to be able to continue through. And he showed that very, very well. And then I kind of started noticing that, hey, like when they blitz him from the slot position where he's a slot corner. And then he plays really good man from the slot position too. So all of a sudden I started seeing his traits that they're a little bit more versatile than I originally had thought. And a lot of good guys on Twitter had mentioned that and kind of asked me very pointed questions. And I love that because it just harnesses your focus as you're watching tape. And they're absolutely right. I think that he's going to be kind of a dual threat that can either play on the outside in sub package. And so we're thinking sub package in nickel or dime. I think he absolutely can play on the outside, but I think he will bump inside as well. And play in the slot and mostly man in the slot. I think to start, I think that's kind of where he's best. And I think that over time, you're looking at a guy who's got certainly the athletic ability to play in the deeper parts of the field in terms of the safety position. And kind of what we're saying, if he has the physicality and has the smarts, those are the bigger things that the Giants focus on, at least in last year's defensive backfield. So, can he check those boxes? And I absolutely think so. So I think it's an interesting pick that fell. Guys always ask, why did he fall this round? And, his measurables were not amazing. And it bucks the trend of what, a lot of guys in the NFL are. They want speed, and especially that corner position. And they think that without that, the guy's not going to be able to play. So he runs a 4.54 40, but watching his tape, I don't actually, usually I chart like a lot of things. I don't recall seeing him burn deep in 6 games. So it's not like I would consider that a weakness by any stretch. It's just he's not overall incredibly fast in a foot race. So anyway, like him, a real good pick there. I think he's a quality character guy too, which is a big deal for this team. I'm psyched to see his development going forward.
I want to then jump to DeAndre Baker, the cornerback out of Georgia, that the Giants picked as their third-round pick. They actually moved up and traded up for this pick because he's also a cornerback. So let's touch on him and then put this whole cornerback package together with Janoris Jenkins and how do you see them contributing this year?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. DeAndre Baker, 5'11", 193 pounds, so a little undersized for that premium. A lot of teams won't take a corner unless he's 6 feet tall. So again, another guy that from a measurables perspective, he's not checking all the boxes for all the teams. But for teams that kind of understand the game and understand his tape, this guy is a feisty competitor. He is very good in soft press technique, which we talked about before. His ability to mirror and match a wide receiver in his route is, I would call it, good to very good, which means it's very close to elite. His ability to ID routes and ID releases is very good. He played it for Kirby Smart down at Georgia, where that defense is very similar to what James Bettcher does and what he wants to run, and that versatility is key for him. And look, this guy, Baker's a competitor. He competes at the catch point. He is no stranger to pass breakups, and he's a guy who hates to lose. You actually do see that on tape. Now, a couple concerns that guys are going to have, he's very physical in his routes, and there's going to be an adjustment period for him going in the NFL with NFL rules. And I think it's a mindset thing. It's back in the mindset and the profile from the Giants for what they want. And he's that aggressive type player. I think they want to coach a guy to be less aggressive versus having to coach a guy to be more aggressive. And so I think that's where he kind of fits the bill right away. I understand people don't love the price that the Giants paid and having to move up and to get him. But, look, my projection for him, he's an immediate NFL starter. For most teams, which is kind of, I would say that's kind of not rare a lot of times for corners coming out of college. I think he would be an upgrade at either side of the cornerback position. He played both sides in college, which he was very comfortable there. I think there's going to be an adjustment period, but, I think that he can play a lot of different things and can really help them. And to put it together, I think that you're going to have, I think Jenkins has had a good career here. But I think Jenkins is, I don't know if Jenkins played primarily on he was on the right side of the defense, if I remember correctly, right, from last year. So
facing the offense, he was on the right side mostly, correct?
Yeah. So I think Baker starts right away on the other side. I think that he and Sam Beal will compete there. I think that he and Sam Beal offer different profiles because Sam Beal is much longer on his arms and his height, so maybe against those larger size receivers and the ability to match up, that's what Beal will give you. But I do think Baker based on tape, I think Baker is a starter. We'll see how it goes in camp. It's going to be a good battle. But I think the key is you want both those players there. You need the depth. You absolutely need the depth. And I think that you see Love filtering in as either a slot corner on third down initially. On early downs, I don't know if he's going to be that guy right away, just because I'm not 100% sold on him in zone yet. And then growing over time into more roles in the safety position. I think that's the way they go. And to be honest, I think it's a big upgrade. And I do think that, when you're looking at year 2 of this thing, I think that you could have a Baker-Beal combination. I think that's okay with Jenkins where he is in his contract now. And that's just kind of the life of the NFL in terms of drafting and procuring talent.
Jenkins may not be here next year. They may just cut him.
Right.
Because I think his dead cap cut is pretty reasonable next year. Brian, your take on these cornerbacks, or any questions that you have for Nick?
Well, let's go first right to Jenkins. Right now, Jenkins' cap hit is $15 million, but it's about, I think it's $7.8 million in dead cap. So you really have the corner there for $7 million. So can you find somebody who's better for $7 million, because the other money's gone no matter what? My question with Jenkins, and he showed this in 2017, is he can have a bit of a petulant personality. And I just wonder if he sees in his mind, and I think quite properly, that he's a short-timer with the Giants, that he might not give the full effort, and in fact act as kind of a bad influence on the younger kids in the secondary. I don't know this for a fact, but I suspect it may be an issue.
That's an interesting comment there, because Gettleman and Schumer are expecting him to be a mentor.
Yeah, well, you can expect things, but they don't always work out that way. I hope it's not the case. He certainly is a talented cover corner. If so, he'll start this year, and you're right, probably not here next year. We don't know what we're going to get out of Sam Beal, so I don't even want to touch on him. DeAndre Baker, I agree with Nick. I think that he's going to start right away. Julian Love, there's been talk, and they did it in a mini camp. They tried him out there. He actually moves to free safety. Then there's talk about him. That might be his all-around permanent position, because Antoine Bethea is not a young man at all. He's a really good player, but he's not going to be here for 5-6 years. So they need to look at a future at cornerback. And the one not mentioned, because he hasn't been in, is Corey Ballantyne. Tragic situation happened with him, and I feel bad for the young man, because in no way, shape, or form was he anything other than a victim, him and his friend. But I liked him. He was a guy that I very much targeted going into the draft, and he was Division II Player of the Year. Really nice player, tough against the run as well as a cover guy. So I'd like to see what we're going to get out of him. The Giants did what the Cowboys did a couple of years ago. They drafted a whole bunch of cornerbacks, and they're going to roll them out on the field, and going to see who fits where and upgrade their positions, but just by finding where the pieces fit into different slots. So I don't know exactly who's going to go where yet. When it all shakes out within 2 years, but I think that the unit as a whole is going to be much better than it has in the recent past.
Interesting points there, especially Love at safety. So, Nick, the X-Man, O'Shane Ximines, are you excited about this pick?
Yeah, I liked a lot of guys liked him, and it was hard to get Old Dominion tape through the draft process for a lot of guys, but I was able to get some after the fact. And he's very interesting. He's really. He played out basically from if we were thinking about positions, we were talking about techniques earlier. He played those basically on the left side of the defense from a 7 technique and wider down at Old Dominion. And his best traits, he's really good with his hands in pass rush, multiple moves and pass rush hand moves. When you see that developed at a younger age in college, that kind of goes for a lot of coaches. It goes a long way, because it probably means he can learn more moves. And it probably means sustained pass rush or more consistent pass rush at the next level that doesn't rely on one thing. There's a lot of different schools of thought there. It's not the best way, but it's one way through. His upper body strength is really good. His ability to run and chase and pursuit is very good, and his speed to power rush is kind of his thing there. Ultimately, I think that for his projection, I think he could be an impact role player right away on passing downs immediately. So on third down sub or nickel packages, it's best for the left side, and I'm particularly most excited for him and newcomer Dexter Lawrence when running TE stunts on that side, or tackle end stunts. That's what the TE stands for. Where Lawrence was really good at doing that in college, and the X-Man, he doesn't have unbelievable get-off, but he's got good second and third stride speed, so it's kind of perfect for that speed counter inside after the tackle moves outside in that stunt, which I can describe in depth if you guys would like, but it's something that I think that they're going to do because they were actually pretty weak at doing it last year.
So you see Ximenez on that weak side against the left tackle. Is that how you see him?
Well, he played in college against the right tackle on the defensive left side. I think he's going to be asked to do both.
Okay.
But I think kind of right away they're going to. I think when they transition college players, right, you want to open them up to the world, but I think you want to keep them in what they're doing, what they're most used to right off the bat, because you want to have them to have basically establish a floor. And for a third rounder, I think you want a guy in there on on nickel third down packages where Betcher gets more creative with his fronts and everything. And I think that would best be served with him on the left side and him with Lawrence on the left side. So I'm envisioning something where he's on the left side as a 7 technique and Lawrence is as a 4 technique or even a 5 technique on that side. And what happens in a TE stunt, and this I'll just get into really quickly, a TE stunt is tackle end, so TE means tackle goes first. So Lawrence goes first, and he's the driver or the picker, and he goes at the tackle. And he basically mauls and picks the tackle, and then the end takes a step upfield, and he bounces inside into almost oftentimes the B gap, and he does so with speed and hopefully plays through contact and basically gets a one-on-one versus that guard. And that stunt, the Giants they weren't super strong in actually getting results in that stunt last year. And so I know a lot of guys were kind of maybe questioning the Lawrence pick. I think he can help that effort. And that's important because it means the other side of the line can do other things, or, it just adds an element. It adds more arrows to your quiver, which is certainly what Betcher wants.
It's interesting because I think a lot of draft analysts and I guess sports writers are looking at him as the second coming of Osi. So the way you described it is very, very interesting. So let's move on to Dexter Lawrence, defensive tackle out of Clemson. He's the second first-round pick that the Giants picked at 17.
Yeah, so he may be the most freakish athlete in this draft. 6'4", 340 pounds, but he moves like he's 300 pounds. I think it was someone from Giants.com had a great picture of him at the podium, and his body type. He carries his weight incredibly well. He wants to bring that weight down. I think he said like 320 to 325 or so. But he's a guy that is long. He's powerful. But he's not that nose tackle type that Snacks was. And just because, like I said, the body type, the way they carry their body and the way they carry their muscle mass is massively important. So he's solid as a run stuffer, but that's actually not really what he's very good at. He's actually very good when moving from the interior. So if he's, in pass rush, he's actually very good when he slants over a gap or two as he moves and basically then works his power after getting the offensive linemen to move with him. That's what he's really good at, and he's very good at his lower body contact balance is really interesting to watch. You cannot chop block him. It's unbelievable. His feet are so light. It's just freaky and fun to watch for guys like me that love scouting. So anyway, yeah, just a super interesting guy, a super interesting player, and I think kind of right away he's going to compete for that interior line position. With Tomlinson and Hill. I don't think he's going to be there right to start. I think he's going to be a key player. Basically, the Giants rotate 2 defensive lines for series, right, for situations. So he's absolutely going to be in that 2 D line rotation. I think over time he's going to supplant Tomlinson. I think that he's very similar to Tomlinson versus the run in terms of overall results, but his upside in the pass rush is way higher. Is way, way higher. So anyway, I think he's a really interesting player. I love that Clemson D line. Love taking anyone from there. And from a player comp, I don't do this that often, but for those that know Michael Brockers out in LA, he's like a heavier version of Michael Brockers. And Michael Brockers started out as a 1 and a 3 technique, and he actually bumped out to mostly a 5 technique, or just farther outside of the line under Wade Phillips there.
Interesting. So your comment about him replacing Tomlinson, when Tomlinson's contract is up, he's the guy that's going to replace him, and they'll probably, and it looks like it might work out that Tomlinson will walk, and they won't have that salary that they have to then match for whatever it's going to command for Dalvin Tomlinson.
Yeah, I think that's the way it is. I think Tomlinson, he's really good against the run. He's athletic. I just don't think that he has right now in this defensive front. You got to be versatile, and I don't think that pass rushing element is there for him longer term. It could absolutely change. Whenever scouts or critics say this stuff, we hope that we're wrong. We hope that the players prove us wrong. But right now, the tape is the tape, and I think that's an area for him that they're, to be part of this better front, you're going to have that element.
Great observations. Okay. And then finally, last but not least, Daniel Jones. First round pick, Jones. Number 6 out of Duke. The heir apparent to the throne.
Heir apparent to the throne. Everyone has a comment and a concern, and maybe a freak out moment with that. And look, I tried not to comment when it first came out. I tried to just take a step back over time. And I was, to be fair, I was actually interested in other parts of the Giants draft. The players that we really just mentioned, I think it was really fun to dive into them. I just put out a Daniel Jones thread yesterday after basically revisiting 2 new games of his, and then the previous 4 games that I'd watched from the season, and just really try to see it. Daniel Jeremiah had a great comment on his podcast. He basically said, look, if you're a draft analyst, who cares what your viewpoint is, right? Like, you don't work for a team. You're not assigning your traits and evaluation to the team and the respective scheme and fit. So our job is to talk about, through the lens of what the pickers think, not what we think. And when you start seeing it and start thinking of it from Shurmur's perspective, I saw 3 things that really stood out right away. Although he wasn't asked to do it often, Daniel Jones is very athletic and can throw the ball on the run. I think he was born to be at the next level in terms of bootleg. That's what Pat Shurmur has shown through Case Keenum, and even going back to Bradford. That's what he likes to do. I think that Daniel Jones throws a real runner's ball to crossing routes. What we mean by that is a ball that's very catchable with good placement that allows the most run after catch potential. That fits right into what Shurmur wants to do in terms of distributing the ball to guys in space. That's the cornerstone of the Andy Reid tree. Whether you want to call it, if it's spread, West Coast, all that stuff. Honestly, it's those are just labels. At its core, that's what the offense does. And I think that the most underrated trait of his is his poise to free rushers and pressure. The guy was hit a lot, but what's interesting is when you watch him in his senior year, his ability to hang in there and deliver the ball, or at least attempt to deliver the ball. He's one of those guys. It's not like a management thing. I think it's more of he just doesn't twitch to things. He's a real competitor. You see that element in his game, and I think that's what the Giants really fell in love with. Again, people can disagree, can hate that element. I think that's the truth. We have to see it through that lens. Do I think, hey, listen, are there real concerns? His pocket movements, absolutely. He's raw. He has issues with what we call crow hops or extra hitches when he makes anticipation throws. These are things that have to get fixed. But they're not death sentences, and they're, for guys like me that were really coming out with, if you want to call it a grade, somewhere in the 2nd or 3rd round level, that is what it is, because we think that he's developmental in these certain traits. The Giants actually obviously view it differently, and that's just kind of the way it goes. There are spreads effectively, and there are differences that are wide between how people view players. And, look, the Giants feel that they got their guy and they want to go get him, or they wanted to go get him. They did that. And ultimately, for me, I see him, my projection for him is I think he can win the backup job first off, right? That's what you got to do to get on the roster, or at least to hold the clipboard, which is really important for him. What I think is going to be hardest for the Giants to balance is I do think that he needs reps to improve upon the things that are going to help secure his floor. You're not going to get reps as a backup. I think the Giants are going to have to go through the transition period that may be kind of ugly, but I think he's a guy that he's shown in his history, his background, when he sets his mind to something, he does it. He wasn't even really recruited by anyone. The fact that he went to Duke was the fact that he was set his mind to it, and his coach, in the last-ditch effort, called Cutcliffe. Without that, he wouldn't be here now, basically. So he's a guy who really hates to lose, and I think that's something that, the floor is a little squishy for him. But I think if you secure that, and then if you add, the upside and the good scheme fit with a guy like Shurmur, look, I see it. I get it, And I think that's how the Giants saw it. And going forward, that's what I'm going to be watching most closely.
Wow. Okay. Well, this went over a little bit over an hour, but we had a lot of really good content here. Final thoughts, Brian?
Just a couple quick points on Daniel Jones, and then I'll stop. The Eli comparison, people saying, well, the Giants found the next Eli. I don't see where that is at all. Other than the fact that the kid he speaks well and he doesn't bite into any of the nonsense and handles the pressure from the press. That I'll agree with. Other than that, I think the comparison ends. This guy can run. He's very mobile. He moves around well in the pocket. They had designed plays at Duke where he would roll to the left, throw back to the right. Designed running plays. Yeah, as a senior, his running yardage went down a little bit. But when you actually college, they have this really dumb thing that they do where they count sacks as carries and that the yardage is negative yardage. If you subtract out that as a senior, he averaged almost 8 yards per carry. 76 yards for almost 600 yards. So the other thing with his game, again, it's a non-Eli thing, is he throws a very nice short pass. And one of the weakest points of Eli's game, and really hurt him when they started to change over to a more West Coast type offense, is that he doesn't have a touch on the short passes. So I think that they went out, they saw the guy, he's going to be their starter in 2020. Eli has no contract right now after this year. He hasn't been extended, and I think the intention is to have him start in 2020. And I think we'll be seeing that, and I think he's going to be a heck of a football player. Anyway, I'll stop right there.
Thank you, Brian. Nick, final thoughts, overview?
Like I said, just psyched to see the development. We're in that stage now, and I think the one thing that just to keep in mind is that these players aren't chess pieces, and that they're going to change. They're going to have ups and downs, and that's what makes this so unbelievable, right? Is the goalposts move. And the evaluations are constantly being done. So really cool to see this phase now where they develop these draft picks that they get. And it's going to take a little while for some players. And watching that is a study in itself. And I think it's an area where, to be frank, Giants need to improve on. And I think this new regime is really trying to improve that part, is player development. And so just something to watch really closely. And, believe it or not, I understand it was a tough year last year. But I do think that the future is bright, and I do think that the arrow is up. I think they've made their kind of bet in certain places, and it's going to be fun to see it play out.
Excellent. So that wraps it up for this episode. Nick, we could see you on Twitter as Tmanic21 and on the Big Blue Banter podcast. I did mention that in the introduction. Anything else you want to mention as to how people can find you?
No, I think that's kind of it. I write occasionally now at cover1.net, but most of my work, like you said, is on Twitter, and that's where I'm kind of sticking to threads and doing threads and that type of thing. That's great.
Okay, great. So you can follow the Big Blue Huddle on our website, giantsfans.net, on Twitter and Facebook at Big Blue Huddle. So on behalf of Nick, Brian, and myself, we thank you for listening into our podcast.